AJ from Card, the creator, had a quote, something to the extent of the best thing about no code isn't so much the no code, but rather just the idea that it dismantles the notion of making serious stuff is only reserved for those serious developers. So I like that angle because it's really more so kind of focused on the building aspect. So it's not trying to get really granular about, okay, what fits within the area of, this side of the fence, no code, this side of the fence, low code or the like, but just like an entire gray area, which actually I personally really like because
Welcome to The Future is No Code. My name is David Atkin. I'm excited to be joined by Max Lind of 8020. They're one of the first big premier no-code agencies, if not the premier no-code agency. Super excited to have you on to get that perspective. I know we'll actually get to some of the questions about agencies, especially no-code agencies. It's crazy that this is like a real thing now. I think it shows progression for the space. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's unless you have anything else to talk about with 8020, we can kind of jump into things.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, maybe just like quick background.
Sure, yeah.
I would say, in terms of just like how we pitch 8020, who we are, that sort of thing. I mean, ultimately, we just sort of pitch ourselves as an agency, to your point, a new agency that just ultimately helps companies move faster without code. Now that could mean a variety of things, and certainly there's probably a lot of questions that you'll get into, but I like to kind of just allude with that because it's kind of both meant as like a somewhat of a tease, but also just a more general idea that the angle that we take is certainly like focused solely on the no code angle specifically.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well let's dive into things here then. All right, so this kind of nicely leads into this, but when did you get into no code, and then what made you join 8020, want to have that thing start going?
Sure. So my background is in design. I for all intents and purposes got into design because of an older, much more talented brother, but so my for time frame wise, I was, in terms of like getting started with no code, I guess when it comes to design was, back in the day when Dreamweaver was a thing. So maybe that it's like kind of my earliest days from the no code perspective. But then over time, I kind of just got into other roles, marketing related, business development, et cetera. But I've still always had that itch in that excitement about just the broader design world. And obviously, as kind of time went on, got outside of my day jobs, got involved with kind of working with Webflow for a number of kind of side projects and that sort of thing. So I guess my excitement in the no code space was sort of reinvigorated then, and then just more recently, obviously, as 8020 came to life, I got an opportunity to officially join and kind of steer the ship, so to speak, and obviously getting back to scratching that itch from a design perspective, but then also just kind of more broadly start to help figure, as with everybody else, figure out a lot of what this means, which is kind of the exciting part from my standpoint.
Yeah, and it's been fascinating to see, the different people come in from either, a design background like yourself, or maybe they stumble into it from a dev background because they were tired of doing repetitive tasks. So yeah, it's been really, interesting to see the different experts that we've been talking to, funnel in from the different spaces. I'm on the design side of things, right? Like I don't know how to code. So for me, it was like, I can't bring things to life unless I use these tools. So, it's exciting to see the different people get into the space that way.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I was just gonna say, I always, kind of describe myself as a generalist in that regard too. So yeah, design background, but just probably very similar to you, you're just, maybe you're an active tinkerer and you're just curious about how things work. And it's like, maybe you don't know how to actually make it happen. But obviously things are slowly but surely changing these days.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well, let's dive into what your definition of no code is. And a lot of times it's helpful to say, okay, what maybe tools or software do you consider in no code, and which ones maybe aren't in no code?
Yeah, I guess probably unlike most, from my guess, I guess, would be, I I kind of think of it more so as, what can be done without the need for code and go from there. And that's like really broad, but I guess my point there being, my definition of what no code actually means is probably much more broad than most. I think, like as a specific tool, there's a service or tool called Card, just to help you build quick, one-page websites, essentially, that, something that I've used personally, will use from time to time. And AJ from Card, the creator, had a quote, something to the extent of, the best thing about no code isn't so much the no code, but rather just the idea that it dismantles the notion of, making serious stuff is only reserved for those serious developers. So I like that angle, because it's really more so, kind of focused on the building aspect. So it's not trying to get really granular about, okay, what fits within the area of, this side of the fence no code, this side of the fence, low code, or the like, but just like an entire gray area, which actually I personally really like, because then that, despite maybe what, others kind of lean towards or gravitate to in terms of the tools that they do like, my thought is, like, if we think of, the broader no code space, like pizza, it's like everybody has their own take, everybody has their own preferences. Like, the Italians might say, like, what we, Americans make for pizza is not pizza. Like, there's certainly a whole debate about pizza, but it's ultimately at the end of the day, it's still pizza. And that's kind of where I fall in line. It's like, it's okay. It's like, it's still pizza. It's still no code. It just, it's whatever your preference is.
Awesome. All right, let's see. And then, okay, so the space and hasn't always been called this, right? And, I think we can debate whether that's the right name or not. I know people have different takes on that, but for better or for worse, like, it has helped us, galvanize kind of all together. Whereas, maybe we had some disparate tools that were kind of tangentially related that now are a little more related. So when do you think, we actually started calling it no code? And do you actually have maybe a person who you credit or somebody that you credit with starting it?
Man, in terms of actually starting it, I would probably be more, who knows, the hands in the air emoji. I would say, though, that, and this is a little selfishly as well, but, we're big fans of Webflow. I feel like they've done a really good job about really trying to, push the branding there with no code along more specifically at, with them creating the no code conf, and really trying to push that angle. And it's not even necessarily like, a selfish thing. I feel like they're doing a pretty good job of just more broadly, carrying all the other tools and services and agencies and everybody that's, kind of touches the space in whatever capacity along with them. So, I would probably say, kind of hat tip to Webflow for keeping that up. They're certainly not the only ones by any means, but I feel like they've done a pretty good job as of late.
Yeah. And to go back to your like earlier point, right? Like, it wasn't like, they could have selfishly been like, well, it's responsive websites only, right? And if you don't do enough of that, then it's not no code. But, it has been more generally defined, like with your definition of, anything that is possible to do that's a little more serious, where you're solving a really serious problem. So yeah, I think, hats off to them for taking that more broad approach to no code and branding it and everything like that.
Yeah. And the other, I'm a big analogy person, so I'll probably give you 10 analogies.
That's all good.
During this call, but I think I've been thinking a lot lately too about, the difference between folks that, enjoy beer or wine or some beverage like that versus the folks that maybe start to do brewing at home versus those folks that actually own a brewery. And like, my point there being like this broader idea of everybody in that capacity likes beer or wine. So like everybody in this capacity likes no code to some extent, whether they're, just they enjoy it consume or to use or to actually build upon. But like this broader idea of currently in the broader no code space, everybody's at different levels and capacities, and you could say that for a lot of things, just more generally speaking about the say like the design world, but more than some of those other industries or mediums. I think the interesting thing about the no code space in particular is just like this idea of again, kind of going back to AJ's quote about it's not solely reserved, or building's not solely reserved for a certain type of person, but this broader idea of no code essentially opening up all these brand new doors that previously didn't seem like they were there, and people realizing that they can build something big or small, or do some task with a set of tools or services with fairly minimal effort, really, when it comes down to it. And again, I guess my point there being like the interesting angle of just more broadly speaking, no code being able to make what was previously hard, a lot easier. And maybe the thing that I like most in that sense is just again the idea of like, as a generalist, just the idea of constantly being curious about like what could be built, getting just as excited about the potential as compared to building itself.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So then the last one in this little intro section. So we've had a little bit of a subconscious grammatical debate going on. So do you go no dash code, or are you a no space code person?
Oh man. Either or. I feel like lately I've actually been going capital N, capital C, all one word.
Oh, all right. You're throwing
without the hashtag. So I'll throw a new one into the mix.
All right, you're throwing you will be officially in your own little infographic off to the right from everybody else on that page then. Awesome. Okay. All right. So kind of getting to the larger part of this interview, and that's really, it's going to affect a lot of different people. In a lot of different spaces. And I think that's why, everyone's excited about it. And we're all looking to see, okay, how is this going to change the world? So first up are businesses. So what do you think this is going to mean for, the startups, the entrepreneurs? What about the small businesses? And then what about enterprises?
Yeah, more generally speaking, the type of folks that we're trying to connect with and showcase that, or showcase what our skill sets could be to is the, kind of those first two, the entrepreneurs and the small businesses. Again, kind of back to my point of just this broader idea of new doors being opened because of certain tools. I guess just leads to a lot of new ideas. Mm-hmm. But probably more specifically, the thing that I think that's probably the most interesting is, if somebody did want to build an Airbnb for, dogs in their hyper local neighborhood, like they could do it, and it could potentially be, a legitimate business regardless of the business sense of it. But like the idea of building that thing is so much easier that, I'm not sure if this is the right word for it, but I feel like there's going to be a lot of folks kind of taking some of those risks on new ideas or new projects or new companies, just strictly because the potential is there, which is really cool. And on top of that, the idea that for a number of years, a lot of folks have kind of a side business of some sort that they do for fun or for money or for both. It just seems like more of those quote unquote side businesses are going to kind of turn into small, interesting, profitable businesses that could theoretically just be their sole gig. So, especially for the smaller folks, I feel like, the whole like David versus Goliath thing, I think, the Davids of the world are going to really be able to carry some more weight there.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then, and then for the enterprise folks, this is probably maybe obvious to some in the no code space, but I think just the broader idea of them not having to worry so much about, if you wanted to build something internal, it could be anything. A lot of folks in the enterprise space just, by nature of being so big, unfortunately move slow. and have maybe some rounds of approvals and just a lot of, bureaucracy to deal with internally. But hopefully some of the no-code tools or just the idea of building with no-code tools, lets them just pretty quickly just try to experiment with something, and then whether it actually comes to fruition for whatever internal tool that they're trying to build. I guess kind of going back to that idea, even as it compares to the small guys, is giving them a chance to take a risk on something without feeling like they're ultimately risking time, which ultimately ends up being money, because usually you can design and build in no code in a fraction of the time, which is part of our pitch, really.
Yeah, it'll be exciting to see how, enterprises start embracing the, more of the startup, mindset, which has slowly been, working their way into a lot of, with lean methodologies and stuff like that. I feel like that's working its way in enterprise. And I think this is just another, aspect in that kind of avenue as well. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So the next group is really the traditional tech sense. So that would be, what is it going to mean for your traditional UX designers or just general designers? What is it going to mean for developers? What is it going to mean for PMs? And there's a couple different levels in terms of like, what is it going to mean for them in terms of like their outside of work life? But it'd also be interesting to hear from your perspective, what is it going to mean for their internal workflows between, like, what's the dev designer handoff going to be like, in a kind of future no code world?
Yeah. I again, selfishly from my perspective, just kind of being in multiple roles throughout my career, I think that is probably the most interesting angle here, is that like the overlap between those folks, the Venn diagram of sorts is going to, kind of collapse on itself a little bit more so. So the PM that obviously needs something from the dev or the designer might be able to obviously kind of like just check off a number of the to-dos on their own without the need, for the dev to do so, just because by proxy of, well, let's just use Webflow as an example. That's being able to, make edits in the CMS, or do some light updates to the website itself. Like, the idea that, with a little coaching or education, the folks that aren't technically supposed to be doing those changes could be doing those changes is really interesting, from I guess, again, from my perspective as sort of like a generalist. I think there's probably some worry there from all those parties involved, like, hey, that's my thing. I don't want you to take, any tasks from me for my job, from the standpoint of kind of protecting what your role is or your importance to the company. But again, as a generalist, I feel like the more that you can kind of become a cog in the grander machine that is your company, and be able to go beyond your quote unquote skill set based on what your job title is, the better that is really for anybody down the road, especially.
Yeah. Awesome. And I'm particularly interested, like, you're talking about Webflow, and obviously like we're already seeing at companies, designers or PMs totally like just offloading that from maybe the traditional developers, or maybe they're outsourcing that to some other agencies, and kind of just doing those things internally. Do you have a sense of like maybe the more true product companies that do have a SaaS product today, and like how more like web apps or mobile apps in the no code space will like work their way into that workflow? Do you have any, cause like that's a different one, right? Where it's like, they already have some traditional code. So it's like, you can't totally start over, at least, without getting rid of some of that stuff. So how does that kind of world work?
Yeah, that's the kind of really interesting gray area, I guess, when it comes down to, most people today that aren't in a building capacity in the broader no code world kind of probably think that most things that are built using no code are kind of the side project or the kind of kitschy, just for fun thing. But I guess it'll be interesting. I don't necessarily have any specific thoughts per se currently, but it'll be interesting to see how. I don't think it's an issue of when by any means. It definitely will happen, but I think a lot of it probably comes down to more so just like the worry or the idea that, and some of this is kind of happening now, but like the idea of no code tools needing to kind of prove their worth and prove that that they can actually hold up in stress tests, for lack of a better term. But it's definitely going to happen. It's definitely not a matter of if, but when. On top of that, I think that's, and this is maybe a little bit of a side tangent, but the interesting thing obviously is, there's a new no code tool more or less every single day. If you keep an eye on Product Hunt or something like that, there's always something, which is great. It just means like people are continually building. I think it might have been Vlad at Webflow that said something about like, the interesting thing, and obviously this is kind of get into your question, but like is when, the no-code tools that exist today are built with no-code tools or built with no-code tools. And like this idea of like this, layers deep of inception. And then like, at some point in time, you just don't realize what it was, what it was ever built with. I mean, to some extent, obviously what Adalo is doing, what you're building, like you're definitely kind of going that route, obviously giving folks a chance of I might consider yours, a little bit more of like a Lego block building kind of scenario. But when you really think about it, like the bulk of the apps that exist today, regardless of who they're from or who built them, kind of have a shared framework of sorts. So at some point in time, while everything looks the same, the backend functionality is really the piece that's the most interesting. So again, like what you guys are doing, it's really interesting to think like what could be built from the platform that you have that exists today versus the 3 years down the road and the things that are built with those things.
Yeah. It'll be fascinating. And like, it's definitely something that's allowed, I think, this movement to happen is like, UX at one point, maybe 10 years ago, I don't know, was like a little more of the wild, wild west, in terms of both UX designers as well as the actual like more non-trained tech person who consumes these apps. Both of those things like was wild, wild west. You didn't know what the proper behavior was for you to work with. And now we have a little more of like, we have systems in place just like that have been established for long times in other industries. You have code, the different kind of code, but an architecture of like, okay, this is how you enter and exit. People get used to those types of things. In cooking, you have different measurements that are your pretty standard things that, have become like, oh, okay, I know how to do that, and those types of things. Whereas like that wasn't really around with, UX and apps. And now that is like possible, which is allowing these like more Lego building block type of no code tools to, I think, really, have some merit behind them as well. So, and not just be like completely like templatized, where it's like, you can't really change too much. So.
Yeah. And I mean, again, from your standpoint at Adalo, I'm sure that there's probably a number of cases where somebody built something in your product a certain way using one of your components or actions or whatever, and you kind of had like a oh my gosh moment of like, oh, I didn't ever even think about like using it that way. Like they're using that thing totally different than the intention, but then you realize that the community is kind of stress testing it too, to realize like what the potential of what could be built. Yeah. Fascinating. All right. Also, awesome. The next group, which I'm obviously like super excited to talk to you about, get your perspective on. So the consulting world, right? So what does this mean for maybe your traditional dev shops? What does this mean for freelancers or, maybe the smaller agencies? And then what is this going to mean for the, traditional consulting background, the big main consulting groups, the non-dev consultants? Yeah. I mean, the freelancers are definitely going to probably benefit the most, maybe in some capacity. I mean, really from their standpoint, once they learn these tools and they have access to, find clients that need help. I mean, their I guess potential is limitless there. I mean, the only thing really holding them back is just yes, finding the clients, but then also just like literal time in a day. You can only build so many things with one person. But obviously, the idea that one person could build, an entire website with some crazy backend database that hooks into 5 other things via, who knows what behind the scenes
Yeah.
crazy workflow. But so they're clearly going to probably benefit the most. Again, like that David versus Goliath aspect. I selfishly, the agencies, big or small, but like us, like I can still consider us, a smaller boutique, quote unquote, agency, just because the angle that we're taking. From our standpoint, we're sort of pitching ourselves pretty broadly. Again, that idea of like helping companies move faster without code. But I would say like we're not. Our pitch really focuses on just ultimately trying to help the client get to a solution quicker, of course, but like simpler too. A lot of times, I feel like half the battle with clients, regardless of where they go, is they just want somebody to literally help them and do so without like any stress or headache. Like the reason that most folks probably go to an agency is because they want to just offload work from being internal and like rely on an expert. And that's like very, probably very obvious, but I feel like the problems that we're trying to solve in the no code space are a little different, just because folks don't always totally understand what no code means, or they might have an idea for something that could still be built with no code, but they're a little unsure on like price points and time to build and all that sort of thing. So from our standpoint, in terms of being able to stay small, but also help clients from like a small person with an idea all the way up to like enterprise sized companies that exist in Silicon Valley. Like we can handle all those types of projects, and then obviously the cool thing from our standpoint is we can do that, or we can handle all those projects, but then we can also do so in like roughly the same timeline. Meaning, like our pitch is about like wanting to get something out the door in, 3 to 5 days or 7 to 10 days, depending on what the project is. And that isn't just to like rush it out the door, but it's just like this idea of, we're trying to just help them cut through the red tape and just like move as quick as possible. Even our approval or our proposal process is really quick. We're, we'll talk to some folks via email, and we'll turn around and give them like a rough estimate in like, 30 minutes to an hour. And, if clients are really excited, we'll get an agreement like out the door really fast. Like I kind of allude to all this is because what we're really trying to do is, yes, this mantra of building with no code is important because it opens up a variety of doors. But then this also the idea of just sort of changing the typical model of like how an agency might operate. Like, we don't spend weeks and weeks doing tons and tons of research ahead of time. Like we just want to move quick and build that MVP of whatever your idea is, and then help you iterate on it over time, because it's like it could be something where the approach that we take makes sense for the first 3 months, and then we need to pivot for the next 3 months thereafter. And like that, I think that's part of the interesting thing about the no code space is like, hopefully in most cases, the projects that we work on, the client never has like the sunk cost fallacy, because if we start working on it for a certain way, and we're building an app using Adalo, and then come to find out like 6 months down the road they need something that you don't support today, then we might have to pivot from you. But then at the same time, maybe 6 months down the road, you actually added that feature into the mix, and we can still hang on and keep using Adalo. And all the while, I think I kind of allude to that sunk cost fallacy, or the not having that sunk cost fallacy is because, in the broader no code space, even though things don't always like translate exactly, I can't export, from one app to another app typically, or tool or service. But the idea, more broadly speaking, of like how you built that thing using the tool can kind of be translated, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. The things that you learned about it in terms of like, hey, these are the features that were most important. This is the things that all of the learning that you get from that, it would be able to be translated, whether you're going different direction and things like that, or whether you're going, okay, now we're going to go to a traditional coding sense away from this, type of MVP that we built because we've proven it, but here's like the stuff that we've learned, from that. It's very, similar to even traditional tech companies that, if you've ever been around a tech company that has had to like switch from like, okay, they were on one language, but that's like like their historic platform. And now they have to like, move to a brand new platform because, coding languages change and things need to change. I mean, it's a little bit similar to that in that like, everything has an evolution where it's like, okay, at some point, like, this product, maybe you have to jump to a different thing, and maybe that's, traditional coding, or maybe that's a totally different thing. Right. But like those things, you're always evolving those things, even in the traditional tech world that
Right.
before no code existed or before no code got powerful enough to like even fathom this thing. So, yeah, it's very, very similar to that. And what do you think? I guess we didn't hit on, what do you think this is going to mean for maybe the non-dev consultants?
Yeah, I guess maybe a couple of things. One, just the broader idea of, probably fairly obvious, but all of a sudden, a new set of services that they can tout on their website that they offer is all of a sudden opened up. I feel like a lot of agencies, not every agency, but a lot of agencies, again, they just want to help clients with whatever. So they'll probably take on most any project and then say, if they don't do something in-house, then they'll farm it out and get somebody that does. But for those non-dev folks, especially, I feel like there's enough of and again, this kind of relates back to that kind of like that second group of, when me talking about the project managers, maybe being able to make some edits themselves in the project. Like, I feel like those non-dev consultants do have, some new muscle to flex that, and, they can do so without talking like they're just kind of making things up, but ultimately going to have to farm it out completely because they don't know what's going on. And it's, again, back to the David versus Goliath concept. I mean, I'll probably kind of keep hammering on that, but it's like, I think, again, more broadly speaking, the more that this becomes the norm, if that's even the right word, the more that, these underdogs are going to have an opportunity to actually, help service clients or companies or what have you with solutions that actually make sense. Now, the differentiating factors are still going to be, like, you could build something one way in no code, and let's say a competitor of ours could build it one way. We could build it the exact same way, but hopefully, our design shops are a little bit more flexed. So like our strength, I guess, when it comes to a head-to-head is also still kind of relying on fundamentals, I guess, if that makes sense, with a lot of our projects, in terms of just making sure that we're still kind of being, yes, a no-code agency, but design first no-code agency.
Awesome. All right. And then last grouping, this is kind of a little bit of a catch-all, but like, what do you think this is going to mean for society in the broader sense, in terms of, maybe software infiltrating into our personal lives? Maybe infiltrating is the wrong word, but making its way into our personal lives a little more in terms of, our kids, their education. And then, what about the broader kind of like economic disparity that this has potential to impact?
Yeah. The interesting thing from my standpoint is like so I'm a huge Apple fanboy. So I think they do a great job with like Swift playgrounds in terms of trying to get kids interested in coding, and that's great. And they're obviously kind of like doubling down on those efforts. I feel like there's probably something here too, that, the more that, again, no code kind of becomes more of a household term, like my parents understand like the value of coding, and like the kind of joke, but kind of serious, like the idea of like, maybe I should start, getting my daughter to learn coding, as quick as possible. But I would argue that today that, maybe getting, yes, going that route, but also getting the younger generation or those folks that don't quite understand code to go the no code route as well, just because it's just as important from the standpoint of problem solving and kind of ultimately kind of putting puzzle pieces together that they wouldn't normally probably have an opportunity to do so with other projects. I again had mentioned, my background is sort of being a generalist. I feel like there's a lot to be said about the folks that can look at the bigger picture and map a lot of things together. And I think a lot of the no coders that really do great work are those that can see the broader picture and map a lot of those things together. So kids, I could totally see, kind of, or no code playgrounds being a thing for kids. For our personal lives, I use, some might certainly have better workflows than me, but like I use Notion for a number of things in my personal life to keep tabs on things I want to watch or eat or purchase, or just like, this or that. And, it's not like I'm automating my entire life. I think that's sort of a misnomer sometimes with no code. Is like, you have to do, like, things that are built have to be some crazy complex thing. Like it could just be, like the way that I use Notion. It's just, I'm kind of mapping some tables together and doing some things that like make my personal life easier. So I see a lot of that becoming more of a thing. And then, just, I guess, adding on to that in terms of like the economic disparity sort of angle, like again, going back to the David versus Goliath angle, that, there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of, and I'll use my, where I live as an example. So I'm from Iowa. I'm actually in Waterloo, Iowa, where I originally grew up. And, I wouldn't by any means say like the tech scene or the design scene here is incredibly booming, but there's a certain industry that obviously does exist. Now, the disparity between like here in the Bay Area is quite obvious, but like the more that these tools start to be the norm, the more that like things that are built out of, like, things that are designed and built from Iowa being roughly the same as, things that are designed and built from California could more or less be the same, and you wouldn't know otherwise, just again by proxy of being able to have access to these tools and all these new doors being open.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I think we're all, super excited to see unfold, and watch the little changes that'll happen from that. All right. So the next section here, maybe one of the toughest actually predicting, and I'll try my best to hold you accountable to actually give some your best predictions.
Okay.
You can choose to explain or not explain and just say, this is what I think, this is my guess. So yeah, all right, let's get this started. So when do you think it'll be as common for somebody to make an app as it is for somebody today to make a PowerPoint presentation?
I'm fairly bullish on this. I would say, 2 to 3 years.
All right,
and
all right.
And again, back to your point of like, it could be a personal app for, for my own sake.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
like an app for my plants or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're not necessarily saying, okay, everybody needs to like start like the next Airbnb, like,
right.
But all right. Next up, when do you think like most colleges will start offering no code classes, and then kind of same for like grade school?
So obviously the current climate that we're in makes me think it's going to be sooner. Mm-hmm. But I would say I'm pretty bullish on this as well. I would say within the next 6 to 12 months, there's going to be, there's going to be some smaller colleges that make a push for it, but I think there's going to be a couple big ones that just realize the importance here for a variety of reasons, that like, a couple big major state schools, not even necessarily in the Bay Area. I would say like a couple big major state schools, like in somewhere in the Midwest, are gonna just catch hold and make it part of their curriculum, and not just like 2 weeks during a broader phase, but actually like an entire 101, 201 dedicated to the broader space.
Yeah. All right, awesome. When do you think, you talked about this a little bit before, but well, I guess that was a new no-code product, but when do you think there'll be more products launched on no-code that are built with no-code tools than traditional coding? So I'm not necessarily saying it needs to be like, a Webflow or an Adalo or something like that, but
sure.
Yeah.
It's hard to say because there's definitely not going to be a, coding apps isn't just going to shut down tomorrow kind of thing. So my guess is this is probably like much further out, but say like 5+ years, maybe mm-hmm. 5 to 10 even, but there's probably more of like a blend there of, apps that are like in that like low code, in between area more so probably, but if anything, like rising tide lifts all boats in terms of like the coding space versus the no coding space. Like it's good for everybody.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, and then next up, when do you think no code will meet up with low code in terms of functionality?
Man, I would say kind of going with the whole 80-20 angle, which is obviously, getting you 80% of the way there for 20% of the effort. I would say, I mean, again, being bullish on this, probably like within 2 to 3 years. I would say for most things, you could probably, get that fully accomplished with no code tools and that visual development angle without even having to touch any even low code.
Awesome. All right. When will we see a product that's like as popular as, let's say, like a Trello or TurboTax or HelloSign, built with no code, with a no code platform?
I feel like I keep using the 2 to 3 years, but I think that's like a good time frame, because I also think that the interesting thing about building with no code is the idea that, and this is like very broad, but just the idea that like how folks think about building changes quite a bit, just because, there's not as much like, there definitely is pre-planning with all this, but I feel like there's not as much worry about mapping out an entire app or idea or whatever, but instead just kind of like going and playing with things, which I think leads credence to just, creativity kind of being prime for some new random popular app like that just actually becoming a thing. So yeah, probably 2 to 3 years maybe.
Awesome. And then when do you think one of those will IPO?
Man, I this is probably more of a 5 to 10 year range for me. Obviously there's certainly a lot of things that kind of fall into that, but there probably is some, like, again, going back to the 2 to 3 year mark of folks that like solely rely on building things with no code that IPO probably in the next 2 to 3 years.
Awesome. Okay. When do you think there'll be more freelancers, agencies, and dev shops that use no code tools than ones that don't?
This one is interesting because I feel like the freelancers especially are going to carry a lot of the numbers here.
Yeah, that's true.
I could see a case where, again, in the next couple of years that the tides have turned quite a bit, and then more dev shops and more like traditional agencies have to catch up, because maybe, like, again, this idea of if you're a small single person team, you're small and nimble, and you can learn something like Webflow or Adalo or Glide or what have you to build something really quickly. And then not only are you able to do it really quickly, but then you're able to, kind of ride the wave now in terms of instead of having to catch up later down the road. So, I mean, probably sooner than we think, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay. And then the last one, which I'm most excited about. So when do you think we'll have global leaders start talking about no code and like actually using the term no code?
Yeah. This one's interesting because I feel like going back to the question about, when like a college or, some dedicated schools are going to kind of pick up no code in their curriculum. I feel like those are tied a little bit more so specifically. So I would say, figure, maybe by, the next 2 to 3 years, again, that kind of time frame, which is like fairly, not that long really when it comes down to it. I guess I think the interesting thing will be is the broader, and this is more the branding, so it doesn't necessarily matter, but is the broader name like no code still like holding true, or is visual development or something like the new thing? But like this idea of like once those first couple schools or colleges pick it up and it actually becomes a thing that is like realistic that folks want to gravitate towards, I think then that's like really the catalyst for it becoming a household name that presidents and politicians or my mom and dad talking about.
Exactly.
What it means.
Awesome. Okay. And then final question. So this is just kind of to leave it on an inspirational note for us. Obviously, everybody, all these experts in the space we wouldn't be doing this if we weren't inspired by this. So what is the most interesting thing you've either seen built with no code, or maybe what's the best story of something that you've seen built because of this revolution?
This one's tough. There's a lot of interesting things happening daily. Again, like small stuff, big projects, like just folks that are like building things that like, might not have been able to exist previously. I would say I'm trying to quick pull up his name too, just so I get it right specifically. But yeah, okay, here we go. So there was a project called Scholarship Junkies that was built not so long ago that essentially was just like a way to apply to college and win scholarships and obviously find scholarships. It was just like just this broader idea of just figuring out a solution to tie this massive database of information to something that was like realistic and feasible for most normal common folks to use. And I think it was an interesting example of like using no code more broadly to make this happen. That actually makes a lot of sense. That again, from your perspective, or your question about, when is the president going to talk about it or a politician is going to talk about it? It's like projects like this that actually, make a massive difference that, for all intents and purposes that hundreds and thousands of people could use. I jokingly, talked earlier about like, I might build an Airbnb for dogs in my local hyper local neighborhood. That's a great idea too. But just like the sheer impact of, knowing how much college costs and schools cost, and the idea that probably even more broadly, the idea that folks that never even knew money existed or where to find it could find it fairly easily is a pretty cool use case, I guess, in my opinion.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join me here today to talk about this stuff. Really great to get, more of a freelance agency, no code agency, whatever you want to call it, that spin on things is really great. We're trying to get all the different perspectives here, so we get all the different pieces together. So it was awesome to have you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. All right. Well, take it easy.